People were terrified of people with HIV, so it was a really difficult time, but it was exactly the right time to do what we did. I had been very lucky to come here in the 70s when I was a punk, and one of the people I met was a really wonderful hairdresser called David. When I came back in the 80s, a man yelled my name, and he was a man I'd never seen before, a terribly, terribly thin man. And I looked at him and I was like, who is this man? And I went over and started to talk to him, and I realized he was my beautiful, previously gloriously built hairdresser friend called David. And I asked what had happened to him. And he told me the story of HIV and AIDS and that he was extremely ill. It made me furious, the stories. You know, being alienated in hospital settings, friends of his being put in black plastic bags on hospital, trolleys when they died. And that's when I decided that I needed to use all of the contacts that I had and find a Trojan horse with which to tackle AIDS. It was the most incredible thing to see. After 3 months, those children were much better. After 6 months, they were incredibly better and living life. And after a year, you couldn't tell the difference between an HIV positive child and an HIV negative child. I remember being desperate and thinking, I'm not going to see my child grow up. Remember, I've got a 2-year-old child now. I'm not going to see my child grow up. And one day in that clinic where we were providing everything else but anti-retrovirals, but that kept people healthier for longer, a woman came in with her boy Brian. Her child had a T-cell count of 6, which meant he didn't have long left. And I happened to be on the phone with my friend who had gone there to volunteer to build the clinic. And he said, there's a lady here who's with her child who is very, very, very ill. And somehow, thousands of miles apart, the two of us came together where I said, tell her to go home, I'm going to pay for those drugs. Because I understood her in a way that other people couldn't. And that's what essentially was the way that Keep a Child Alive became a real thing. That's why I was passionate and dedicated to providing treatment, anti-retroviral treatment to children and families in the developing world. Anti-retroviral drugs, which was otherwise known as the triple drug cocktail, were an absolute life-saving invention. And for Americans, it was incredibly important. America was the primary place where people were dying in ridiculous numbers. But in Africa, it was spreading and spreading. Those drugs were $11,000 a year until generics were able to be made and copied those drugs. It was as if the powers that be said, Africans aren't worth 11 grand a year, or the poor aren't worth 11 grand a year. Pretty soon, every single child in that clinic was having their medicines paid for by Americans. I was able then to go and explain that to Alicia Keys, who I'd become friends with, and get her on board. Alicia and I embarked upon a really extraordinary piece of activism involving President Obama. He announced that, in fact, President's emergency plan for AIDS relief was going to treat 2 million extra people. It was such an incredible, joyous win for all of us. They're all women that have no one else. Empowered mothers, I believe, are the answer, because we should be caring more about how women raise children and give them help to do it properly. I'd like to say to my 15-year-old self, don't fall into the box of the way that we women are supposed to behave. And if you really, really focus on making people's lives better and giving, you notice that your life completely changes.